Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the ones here in the Hangouts or the ones that submitted lots of questions. As always, those who are kind of new to these Hangouts, you're welcome to ask a first question so that we can get started with something from your side. And then I'll switch over to the Q&A. Is anything on your mind for those of you who are kind of new here? Nothing? Okay.
I've got a question about site links.
All right.
So obviously we all know that the site link domain. No, I'm totally forgetting. It's 3 a.m. We're trying to suppress a number of URLs for our site links for good reason, because many of them result in a login page. And I'm wondering if there's any additional hints you can give us to do so.
So the site links, the motion tool is probably the most general way to handle that. But what will happen there is it'll be slightly demoted. So the site link depends on the query as well. So for some queries, we might show the site links. For others, we might kind of drop it down out of the list and not show that one anymore. What might also happen is if you just have a few site links for an individual query, then maybe we won't show any site links if they're demoted. The demotion takes a bit of time, though, so that's something where you might be looking at a month or two for that to get picked up.
We've been consistently demoting the same URLs for probably 16 months.
Okay, that should be picked up by then. But in that case, what's probably happening is they're slightly demoted, but they're still visible. So if they're really URLs you don't want to have visible like that, you almost need to put them on no index so that they drop out completely. I don't know if that would be suitable in your specific case.
Yeah, to put a point on it, we actually have when one logs into our service, what seems to be your homepage, so if you click on our brand logo and so forth, is a different URL. So it's home dot. And so because of that behavior, lots of folks actually link to it because they think it's actually our homepage. So to some degree, there's some downsides for us to say no index that page because there's a lot of links pointing to that particular URL. So it's a sticky one for us.
So another idea might be to use the rel canonical for something like that.
We did that too. And I've actually updated the title and meta description to match the actual homepage to try to help you see that it is very similar. But I think the challenge is the content when you request it, because we actually had to create a logged out version of the logged in page, because otherwise you'd be 302 redirected to another login page, which then has other link challenges. No. So anyways.
Yeah, that's sometimes challenging, especially with login pages, with logged-in services. We see that with our sites as well regularly, where you search for Gmail and it says, well, this is a login page, or it's blocked by robots text because we blocked our login pages by robots text, and it's not always trivial to get that right. And sometimes our algorithms get it wrong too. So what I would do in a case like that is maybe send me the URLs and the queries that you're using, so that I can double check with the site links team to see, is this kind of still acceptable, or should we be doing more to help fix this kind of issue?
Sweet, thanks.
All right. Kind of like last time, the Q&A widget seems to be stuck, but I copied out all of the questions, so I probably will be missing the last couple if there's some that were recently submitted, but in general, these should be pretty much all of them. I've kind of swapped around the order a little bit to make them a little bit more thematic, matching each other, but let's get started here. When it comes to location header, assuming the location header contains Cyrillic characters, what happens to Googlebot? Will it try to interpret the redirection anyway, or will it resolve it kind of like a 404? From our point of view, non-Latin, non-English characters are fine in URLs. We'll try to fetch them in the proper encoding. So if you use a different domain name, an IDN, for example, then we'll try to pick that up and use that appropriately. If you have the characters in the URL, we'll try to pick that up. We just recommend, especially for the path and the query parameters, to use UTF-8 so that it's kind of consistent with the rest of the web. If a page has been canonicalized, are there any situations where Google might still show the duplicate non-canonical version of a page in search results? For example, if the query contains location keywords that only the duplicate version contains. So there are some situations where that might happen. On the one hand, if we don't trust the rel canonical, if we see that these pages are significantly different, that might be a reason for us to kind of ignore the rel canonical there. What can also happen is if you specifically search for a URL, then we'll try to show you that URL because we think you're trying to look for that, even if we know that there's a rel canonical or a redirect in place for that. So that came up, I think, in a different question here as well, where you're looking for a domain name that had a site move. And essentially, if we're seeing that you're looking specifically for a URL or specific for a domain name, we'll try to show you that, even if the content isn't indexed like that. AMP sites, how are inbound links to the AMP domain counted, as the inbound link is really pointing to the site that's cached on Google? So the AMP pages have a rel canonical to your desktop page or to your primary page. And with that, we forward all of the signals, all of the links to the canonical page. In September, we exposed 8,000 URLs with a JSession ID parameter with no canonical tags. We fixed this, but the rate at which they're being dropped is very slow. Is there anything we can do to speed up the process? So assuming you added a rel canonical to these URLs, then that's something where when we crawl and reindex those pages, we'll be able to take that into account. The tricky part here, I assume, is if you have a session ID parameter, then that ID will be fairly unique. So it's not going to be that common that we actually recrawl these pages very frequently. So it's easily going to take half a year or so before all of that settles down. In general, I don't see this as being a big problem because when we index pages like that, we recognize that they're the same as others that you already have, and we fold them together anyway. So if you do something like an in-URL query, you'll probably still find these, but in practice, they wouldn't be causing any problems for your site. Another canonical issue, I have a mobile version, but it's under the main domain. For example, domain.com/web is the desktop version, and /mobile is the mobile version. What should I do for the canonical? Just like any other mobile pages with separate mobile URLs, just use the rel canonical pointing back to the desktop version so that we can focus on the desktop version. We can index the desktop version normally, and we still find the mobile version, and we can show that in search for mobile users. We're a DIY brand having .de and .com websites, always in DE and English language with the same content. So we did cross-domain canonical to strengthen the DE-DE version and the .com-en versions. It looks like cannibalization now on visibility for the German index. So this is something where you kind of, I guess, like without looking at the site directly, that there's something maybe not set up optimally with the hreflang or with the geo-targeting. So for the geo-targeting, the .de site will automatically be geo-targeted to Germany. The .com will be generic, which might be that it learns a specific country, or it might be that you specify one in Search Console. If you don't want to specify one at all, in Search Console you can select the checkbox, but then choose Unlisted in the drop-down with the countries.
John, just a quick question. What happens if I undo the specific, let's say the USA, geo-targeting in Search Console? So if I undo that,
if you just
I currently rank so well in Mexico as an example. Let's say I chose that, and then if I undo that, would my ranking change right away? If I
Right
was
away.
always, well, I mean, if I was always ranking really well, and then all of a sudden now I undid that, what would happen?
So if you just unselect the checkbox, what will happen is our systems will try to figure out which country you're targeting on their own. So they'll look at things, maybe, I don't know, where your server is located, where we see that people are looking for your website, and try to take that into account for geo-targeting.
It'll try to figure out where, okay, the
Yeah,
location, okay.
it'll try to figure it out on its own. So
What if it's generic then?
if you want it completely generic, you have to select the checkbox and then choose unlisted in the dropdown, which is it's a very subtle difference, and I think for most sites it doesn't make sense to actually do that.
Yeah.
But there's some situations, especially if you take a domain name that used to be targeting one country and you take that to turn it into a global website,
Yeah.
then explicitly telling us that this is supposed to be global really helps us to kind of understand that shift a little bit faster.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thanks.
The other thing with this question, the German and the English version, is I'd really watch out to make sure that you're using hreflang properly. I see a lot of sites use hreflang incorrectly in that maybe they have a redirecting homepage and they don't mark that up as X default, or maybe they mark up pages as being too specific. So saying this is the German page for Germany and this is the English page for the US, and you don't really have a generic German and don't really have an generic English page. So these are things that sometimes play a role. What I would do specifically in this case is go to the help forum and get help from other people who have gone through this process as well.
Or if he makes the site completely German, then isn't that also unique, specifically catering?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell how the current setup is without the URL there. So that's something where usually in the help forums, people will be able to give more specific advice and say, oh, you're missing this totally obvious thing. Or maybe they'll come and say, oh, you're doing everything right, and it's not working at all. We need to kind of bring this to Google's attention. We know some demographics from not logged in users, like the age or gender. Is it a problem to change parts of the main content and offers for those visitors, or does that count as cloaking? So from our point of view, this is, I guess, you kind of have to watch out that you don't go too far in this direction. On the one hand, if users are logged in, then you can provide a different experience for those users than you would to non-logged in users. This is specifically common for services where a lot of the content is very different when you're logged in, like, I don't know, an email provider or Google Drive, those kind of services where the non-logged in homepage is just so generic and doesn't have the same content as the logged in version would. With regards to cookieing users and kind of trying to recognize where they're from, I think that's something you kind of have to watch out for, that you don't do it too, let's say, too aggressively, in that the content that the average user sees when they come to your homepage should be the equivalent content that Googlebot sees when it comes to crawl your homepage. Because otherwise, there'll always be this kind of mismatch in that people are searching for something, they find your site in the search results, they click on it, and they don't actually find that content when they go to your page. And then they come to us and say, hey, Google, why did you send me to the site? There's nothing there that I can use. So I try to make sure that you're swapping out things that add maybe detail to the actual content, but yet you're not swapping out the primary content, the content that people would want to find when they're going to your pages. We changed our domain name 6 months ago with a nice redirect from our old domain. However, there's still lots of URLs indexed with the old URL. What can we do to speed that up? So there are two things, I guess, that you can do to kind of to kind of keep in mind there. On the one hand, you can submit a sitemap file for the old and the new URLs so that we can recognize the redirect a little bit faster. On the other hand, it's important to keep in mind that we don't crawl all URLs at the same time. So it's easily possible that it takes 6 months, maybe a year, for us to actually recrawl all of the URLs on a site. And we take that time until all of those redirects are processed. And additionally, if you're explicitly looking for the old domain, then we'll try to show it to you, even if we know that this redirect has been in place for a while, even if we index the URLs with the new URL. So if you're explicitly looking for an old brand name or an old domain name, then you'll probably find that content in search, even if we index it in a different way.
We actually have a similar problem. We migrated a site from one ccTLD to another. That was probably 7 years ago. You still have about 700,000 pages in index on the old domain, which 301s to the new domain.
Yeah, this is probably one of those things where if you look at an info query for some of those individual URLs, you'll see that we're actually indexing the new one instead. So that's something that sometimes plays a role there. Another tricky aspect that I've seen from time to time is robots text, in that if we can't crawl the old URL because it's blocked by robots text, then we can't find the redirect. So I don't know if that plays a role in this case.
Cool, thanks.
Google currently presents a result for one TLD, but shows site links for a different TLD. Additionally, the cached version. I think this is your question that you brought up before.
Yeah.
So specifically around site links and TLDs, on the one hand, we don't specifically say that the site link needs to be from the same site. So sometimes we'll recognize that different TLDs belong together, and we'll show site links that are kind of cross-domain almost in the search results. So that's sometimes possible. But as I think we chatted before, it's really important that we can pick up the hreflang content, the hreflang markup properly, and that we can trust that. So I think in this case, the problem was maybe the Canadian page was marked up as being English and French, but actually the page was in English, so we didn't trust the markup because it didn't match our expectations from a language point of view. But I think some of the things we talked about there should actually help here.
Sounds good.
4 months after removal, old URLs continue to be added to not followed errors. Pages in their link from section have either not existed for months or exist but definitely never linked to these 404 URLs. What could be happening? What should we do? Probably we just have a good memory on our side, and we thought that there used to be content here or there might be content here, and we tried it. So I think this is one of those situations where you have to take your knowledge of your website and what has happened and use that when you're interpreting the data in Search Console. So in Search Console, we show you all of the crawl errors that we find because we think if you would see this in your log file, then you would probably want to get it confirmed in Search Console. So these are URLs that we've maybe run across, we've stumbled across by looking at text files, by looking at old links. Maybe these are old URLs that used to exist but are now removed. And we just retry them when we have time. We generally recrawl them less frequently than normal content on your website. So it's more a matter of, well, we have all of these URLs that we think maybe there's something useful here. We'll just check them from time to time. And if they all return 404, that's perfectly fine. That's not something you need to fix. So from our point of view, this is more an information for you that we tried these URLs and they didn't work. If you know that they shouldn't work, then fine. You don't need to do anything there. It doesn't cause any problems at all to have these 404 errors. Is there anything I can do when Google is not following a meta no ODP rule that I have on my site for over 6 months now? We should be following that, actually. I don't know if you're here in the Hangout, Dallin.
I guess the one caveat there is if he's searching for brand queries, which is what we spoke about before as well. Sometimes Google and Bing, for that matter, will display the title of the SERP differently, and they'll just construct. So Bing, as an example, will just construct their own. There's no real way that I found to force it. Google is slightly different, so that may be part of his challenge.
Yeah, so the no ODP specifically applies to the snippet, the description below the title. With the title, like you mentioned, we have algorithms that try to figure out what the best title is there, and in some of those cases, that's a rewritten title, depending on what we find on the page, what we know about from the site, those kind of things. But the description itself should be picked up fairly quickly. We should be able to take that into account, even if it's, or specifically if you have the no ODP specified there, then we should take that into account. One thing kind of to keep in mind here is like you mentioned as well, is it depends a lot on the query. So we might take the generic description that you have in the description meta tag for one type of query, and for a different type of query, we might take something more from the content of the page itself. So it's not always going to be the case that we just one-to-one take the description and the title. We might choose to rewrite that slightly, or to kind of put it together in a different way. But if you're seeing that we're not following the no ODP tag and you've put it in place for a couple of crawls, then that's something I'd see as a bug. That's not something that I'd see as we're like listening to our own signals. If you specifically tell us that this is not something you want to have used, we should be taking that into account. Related to the sitemap index, I have a multi-language site. Each site has its own sitemap, including hreflang. For example, one of the sitemaps has 1,000 URLs sent, but only 600 URLs have been indexed. How can I improve the sitemap indexed? I guess the short answer is you can't easily do that, because we don't guarantee indexing of all URLs. It's very common for us to get a big sitemap file with a lot of URLs, and we actually only maybe crawl and index a part of those URLs. It depends a little bit on the website, on the other content that we have found on the website. But in general, we can't guarantee that we'll be able to index everything in a sitemap file. One really common thing that I see with sitemap files specifically is that we don't have consistent URLs. So, for example, you might submit a URL with index-html at the end in the sitemap file, but actually within the website you have it linked as just / without the index.html. And then we're in the situation where we see index.html in the sitemap, we see maybe just / on the website directly, and we have to make a decision which one to index. And if we choose the one that's maybe on the website or any other version that's not in the sitemap file, that won't be counted in the sitemap file as being indexed. So it might be that we have the content indexed, but we just choose to have it in a different URL.
Hi, John. Related to that question I submitted.
Okay.
So actually, we have multi-language. We have 32 locations website, and each website have a sitemap. We include the hreflang. So I was wondering, maybe is the content itself? Well, we already translate to 32 languages, and we submit to the sitemap. So I was wondering, maybe I'm not sure it's duplicate content, but not quite sure I mean that the content itself is in different language, and we submit with the hreflang in the sitemap, and as a result, the index number not actually 100%, only like 60%.
Yeah. It's hard to say without looking at the website directly.
Okay.
I know there's some situations where we just don't index everything in the sitemap file. We see this particularly if a website is kind of low quality. If we see a lot of URLs from this website and they're all in the sitemap file, then our systems might say, well, we don't really trust this website that well, we won't index everything. When it comes to a website where you're talking about 1,000 URLs, that sounds like something more reasonable. But if you have, of course, the 30 different language versions, that's still a lot of URLs altogether. So it might be happening that we say, well, for some languages, we index everything because we think this is great content. For other languages, we say, well, we don't really know how to classify this content. Maybe we'll index a part of it and see how it kind of performs in search.
I think the other question is how long these sitemaps have been available. Because I've seen very large-scale sitemap submissions take quite a long time. The largest number of URLs I've seen indexed in a day is about 2 million. So if you just submitted the whatever 30,000, so 1,000 times whatever 30 languages, then it could take some time.
Yeah, that's definitely a factor as well. What I would do to try to figure out where this problem is coming from is to split the sitemap file up into smaller pieces and try to find logical chunks that you can do where you can say, well, these are the category pages, these are the product pages, these are maybe blog posts, informational pages, so that you can figure out what type of URL is getting indexed and what type isn't getting indexed. And sometimes that kind of points you to maybe the URL structure is slightly different than we actually have in the sitemap file than what we have indexed. Maybe it points you to things where we're just saying, well, we try to index as much as possible, but we just can't get through to everything for this website. And there's kind of like maybe the 20, 30% missing in all of these different sections. But that should be able to kind of guide you towards, is there a technical problem, or is this just the way that Google chooses to index?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, how to enable server support for if modified since header? Are there any tools? In general, this is something that I'd see as a normal web technology, which you can enable on pretty much any server nowadays. And a lot of the content management systems, they support it by default, so you don't have to do anything specific. I don't think there's any tool from Google to test this, but there are lots of other third-party tools out there to test if modified sense support. Should small images be optimized to include alt text and titled attributes? They're not product images. You don't really have to do that, especially if it's not something that you need to have visible in image search. Then I think you can probably skip that and not add any specific alt text or title there. I believe from some usability guidelines, you have to specify at least something, but you can probably just specify an empty string for things like that. Can schema markup for logos be added to a page where the logo is fetched from CSS, or should the logo image have its own H1 tag? If the image is embedded via CSS, then I don't think you can specify the schema.org markup for that because it's not within the page directly. You may be able to submit it with JSON LD, though, so that's one option you might look at there. With regards to logo being in the H1 tag, that's kind of up to you. Some people do that, some people don't. That's not something where I'd say we have any hard guideline on. I have a website in search engines. My description is not coming up properly. It's showing different. Can you help me on that? We touched on that briefly before as well, in that we try to match the description to what the user is searching for and what's actually on your website. And that can vary depending on the query. It also depends a bit on the website, what you have specified. So there are some situations where we'll take more from the page itself than the description meta tag. Really common cases for that are where the description meta tag is just a bunch of stuffed text, just a bunch of keywords lined up behind each other. That's not something that tells the user what this page is about. We don't use that for ranking either. So you can try to, I don't know, write more natural descriptions if that's possible. But when you're looking at things like this, I'd really also recommend just using the queries that people actually use instead of doing a site query to double check what's actually showing up. Using JSON LD markup on a page that has no index, does that make sense? from our point of view, that generally doesn't make sense because the page wouldn't be indexed, so we wouldn't be able to do anything with the markup that you have specified there. Of course, you're welcome to put markup on these pages. Maybe there are other reasons why you'd have markup on there, but if we don't index the page, then we can't really assign markup to that page. 6 weeks ago, we updated our site with SVG graphics. To date, we haven't seen any of the images showing up in image search, but the PNG versions, they work. What's up with that? So I think that there are two things playing into this. On the one hand, we can index images that are using SVG. General, that works fairly well. The other thing is that image search is just much, much slower than web search. So when it comes to picking up new images or modified images particularly, that's a process that takes a lot longer than normal web search would. So you need to be a bit more patient there. If you've done this 6 weeks ago and none of your SVG graphics are being shown in image search, then it might be a technical issue as well. It might make sense to kind of send me the URL so I can take a quick look to make sure that they can actually be processed on our side, not that maybe you have something special in your SVG files that we're not able to pick up and use for image search. We're using rel next and rel previous to signal that we have more search results returned by the site. If we're on page 3 of the list, will we get pinged by Google because the links to anchors rel previous, rel next are the same as on to page 2 and 4? No, in general, that would be fine. I mean, that's kind of how it works. You have the list link of pages that belong together in this set. So that would generally be fine. One thing I'd kind of watch out for there is that you're not providing an infinite list of items with infinite number of pages, because then our crawler might get kind of stuck in this section of your site and kind of keep crawling and crawling and crawling without picking up more content. So sometimes it makes sense to say I just have the first couple pages of the set indexed and the rest has no index, no follow, so that crawlers don't get stuck in that.
I think it's important to note that maybe people are using rel next prep on the actual A tags, so on the actual links instead of the head section.
Oh, yeah. So if you're using it on the links, then we don't really take that into account. We really need that in the head. So that's a really good point. Maybe we need to document that a little bit clearer. I noticed the number of my internal search pages ranking highly for some top terms. They're fairly thin and not really customized with quality content. Google says I should block such pages. Why is Google seeing value in these pages anyway? I don't know. That's hard to say. In general, so I mean, sometimes what can happen is that category pages are still kind of valuable if someone is searching for something and the category page is a good compilation of content you have on your site. I wouldn't say that's automatically something you need to block from Google. We also use these kind of category and search listing pages to discover all of the individual items on the page. So that's sometimes useful as well.
Same thing with tags.
Sorry?
Tags. Tags.
Tags.
Same thing with tags as well.
Tag pages can be useful as well. So it's not that I'd say you always need to block them, but sometimes they're really thin kind of category and tag pages or search pages, which probably don't provide a lot of value. And if you look at your site and you think that this might be the case, that we're indexing pages like that, I'd just put a no index on those pages. If you don't have a no follow there, then we'll still follow the links to the individual items, but we can at least concentrate on the more relevant content within your website.
What happens if the tags or category pages are blocked in your WordPress website, as an example, and then so you selected a robot, like not to index those, but then you check your sitemap in Search Console and you see like 1,800 errors in there.
Okay, so if you put a no index on them, but you list them in your sitemap file, is
Yeah.
that combination?
Yeah.
We would crawl them, we'd find the no index, and we wouldn't index them.
Yeah.
So the no index is for us a really, it's a strong directive that you really don't want to have this index.
So how long
and
is the warnings going to still stay on Search Console?
probably as long as you keep them in the sitemap file.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes that also makes sense to put those in the sitemap file. For example, if you switch from something that's indexed to no index, then maybe submitting those in the sitemap file helps us to kind of recrawl those a little bit faster. That's one legitimate reason where you might do that. Another thing is some sitemap generators just submit these URLs anyway, even if they are no index, and we have to deal with that too. That's how the web is. It's not always perfect.
Okay.
Fetch this. So about the single URL fetching tool in Search Console. How is the URL ranked within minutes? Do you run all 200 algorithms on the URL or a subset of them, and then run a balance later? Can the initial ranking of that one URL change even more than normal as other algorithms run? So I think this is about the fetch and submit to Google feature in Search Console. And for us, this is really something where if you have something that you quickly need to have indexed or updated in search, then that's a great way to do that. I don't know if it works within minutes. That seems fairly high bar. Maybe the teams that have that fairly well organized. We do sometimes. So it kind of depends on the URL and what is actually happening with the URL with regards to which algorithms are run there. We do try to figure out how we should show this URL in the search results. Sometimes we pick up information that we have maybe from the rest of the website where we say, well, in general, this is a really, really high-quality website. So maybe this new URL that we just found for the first time through this tool is also a really important URL. And we'll kind of give that a little bit more weight in the beginning. And then over time, usually this settles down where we say, oh, we have more signals about this URL. We know how it's linked within the website, how other people are linking to it. So we can kind of apply that more long-term status to it. So it's not that I would say this URL is submitted and it stays like that forever, but rather that we try to take a limited set of signals that we have, apply those first, and then as we get more, we apply more signals, which might mean that the URL goes up in ranking because we see, oh, this is actually much better than we assumed, or it might be that it goes slightly down in ranking where we say, well, we kind of assumed the best for this URL, but actually it didn't turn out to be that important overall. So it kind of changes over time. And I think that's a normal process for a lot of new pages that we discover on a website. And it's even harder when we discover a completely new website where we don't have any signals at all, where we kind of have to say, well, where do we put this in here? Is this really important that we need to have it indexed immediately because maybe this is something people really need to find very quickly? Or is this something that we are able to kind of take the time to figure out what the proper signals are to show that properly? But this is really hard work on the search engine side to figure out that type of balance. What's the best way to deal with a site that has 15,000 pages duplicated across 40 location branch microsite variations? All locations are within the same country and language, so hreflang doesn't seem to apply. Canonicalize, no index. What should we do? So just from the question alone, this kind of runs into the whole doorway site situation where you have a lot of different pages, but actually they're all the same or they're all leading to the same content. So that's something where I probably try to figure out what it is you're really trying to have indexed, how you want to be found in search, and avoid situations where you're just saying, well, I will just duplicate this 100 times because I have 100 store locations. So there might be things that you'd say, well, this is really important general information, and you have one version of that for all of your stores. And there might be things that are very store-specific, like opening hours, locations, phone numbers, those kind of things, where you say, well, this is very specific to each individual store, and I need to have that separately indexed. So finding the right balance there is sometimes tricky. The thing to keep in mind is the fewer versions of the page that you have, the easier it is for us to pick one canonical, and the stronger that page becomes in search. So if you have one piece of content and you duplicate it across 100 websites, then all of those different versions are competing with each other, essentially. So you're making it really hard for that piece of content to show up for generic queries. So if instead you make one page that's really, really strong and really, really good, then that's one that we can pick up and say, well, this is a great page for this topic in general. And if you have separate pages for the individual store locations, we can show those separately as well. So kind of finding the right balance between maybe some duplication, listing all of the individual information that's actually relevant for the stores, and having really, really strong general pages that are valid across all of these stores is kind of the tricky balance that you're looking for. And some of that might be affected by marketing, might be affected by legal reasons, where you say, well, for legal reasons, I need to have this on my German homepage as well as maybe my Austrian homepage. So those issues can come into play there as well, and sometimes you'll have to work with things like a rel canonical to kind of fold those together, or no index, or maybe you even just have to live with some of this content being duplicated because you can't fold it together, and it should theoretically be indexable separately. Let's see. Bunch of other questions here. What's the value in even indexing hacked or malware URLs that even Google identifies as being hacked? Why consider any aspect of these or allow users to select them? And then some example URLs. So from our point of view, it's a tricky balance there in that these hacked sites are not hacked on purpose. It's not that the webmaster is going, I want to provide all of this pharmaceutical information instead of my restaurant homepage that I had before, but rather that they're kind of being abused on their end as well. So we don't want to drop everything from search that comes from a site like that. On the other hand, when we do recognize that the content itself is hacked and ranking for hacked terms, then we do need to respond to that and say, well, maybe we shouldn't be showing this content. Maybe we should just be showing the old homepage instead. So that's another, I guess, tricky situation in finding out what we should really be showing there. We do try to inform the webmasters of their hacking to encourage them to fix things a little bit faster. I know the webspam team works really hard on this as well to remove hacked content from queries where we do see it showing up. But it's not a clear-cut case that we would say, well, if part of this website is hacked, we should show none of the website, because there's still sometimes value in having at least maybe that one non-hacked homepage that you have that being shown in search.
Well, suppose there was a scanner that you guys would be able to create where, yeah, you know, the webmaster wakes up in the morning, he sees the website hacked, he fixed the problem, he scans it, fetches it, whatever, and then boom, the web spam team doesn't have to deal with it. It's automatically your scanner, like.
Yeah, that would be useful. Sure.
Write it on your list.
I mean, it's really hard with a lot of the hacked content, because there's some things that are totally obvious where we have algorithms that pick this up very quickly and you don't see it at all in search. But there's some things that are really subtly hard to pick up. So if, I don't know, a pharmacy gets hacked and has Canadian pharmacy spam on it suddenly, then topic-wise it could theoretically kind of fit together. It's really hard to recognize, is the webmaster trying to spam us? Is this some random hacker that's trying to spam us? Is this website maybe just configured incorrectly?
Yeah.
So these are the type of situations that are really tricky. Or if you take a homepage and it has a bunch of hidden links on it that were added by the hacker, what's the difference between a webmaster adding all of these hidden links because they're in some kind of a crazy link exchange?
Right, right.
Like, what is actually happening there? Should we be ignoring those links? Should we be flagging it as hacked to the webmaster? It's really hard, and it's something that I know is a really big topic, and it has gotten harder and harder to handle, and webmasters have a lot of trouble handling this kind of hacking situation. And there are a lot of sites out there that are kind of abandoned anyway, where even if you try to email the person that's listed on the site, if they have a contact form, you don't reach anyone because it's like, well, this was set up for an event in 2010, and nobody from that event committee is around anymore, but the website is still running because the hoster, I don't know, has a deal for 10 years, and it's still kind of out there.
Right. I see. Okay. So just let the web spam team figure it out.
We have the webspam team that manually tries to figure it out. We have various algorithms that try to recognize this. Malware is, of course, a variation of that as well, where if we recognize that, we show the interstitials. Phishing is a common variation there, too. Some of these are really tricky, too, because they cloak to Googlebot, or they block the content from being indexed, which happens to a lot of phishing content, where they'll use URLs on your site that look like a bank homepage, but they block those from being indexed, and instead only use those for email phishing, for example. So you do a site query, and you say, well, all of my normal content is indexed. I don't see any bank content being indexed, but actually that content is still serving somewhere on your server.
Right.
So there are lots of tricky things happening.
What are you doing? What are you guys doing still with the widget spam? Because I'm noticing. I told you about this one site with 250,000 widgets that basically is embedded on their clients, and then in return, it's just basically sending, ABC logo, ABC logo, ABC logo, and then different keywords and so on and so on and so on. What do you guys do about that? Where their clients basically, they're asking their clients to pay, and so in return they're saying, hey, link my logo on your homepage. I mean, they've been doing this for 4 years. I'm just surprised it's still around because other big brands went through this and they got, slapped.
Yeah. So the websam team handles this in different ways, in the sense that for some of these, if we can isolate them properly, we just say, well, we recognize this pattern, we'll just ignore that completely. For other things, it's not as easy to isolate, and they have to take different actions. So like reports like that are always useful to the team. I think you sent that a while back as well, right?
Yeah, I sent it to you. Yeah, I mean, I can send it to you again, but just to show you. But I mean,
yeah.
I don't think you can ignore such a huge issue with so much, because what it's doing is just basically driving the little guys to the ground because of that.
Yeah. So when I say we ignore that, it's not so much that we ignore the report, but that we recognize these links are there, and that we essentially drop them from our link graph.
Okay, wow.
Well, we say, well, we know there's something sneaky happening there, but maybe it's set up in a way that the people are confused, they don't really know what they're doing, or they're accidentally doing this, and if we can just drop them from our link graph, then they don't cause any problems. And in some situations, we will inform the webmaster of a manual action and say, well, this is something you need to clean up as well. But at the same time, we essentially try to make it so that they don't cause any problems from that.
I see. Okay.
So it's not that we ignore the report and we say, oh, well, it's like no problem, but we try to find the right response for that. And that might be to say, well, we recognize you're doing this sneaky stuff, and we're ignoring that sneaky stuff so that it doesn't cause any problems for our algorithms.
What if it's different anchor text, like with another site that has different anchor text?
I mean, that's essentially the same type of issue.
Oh, yeah. I see. Okay. Do you want me to still send it to you or no?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. these are always useful reports. It's not that the webspam team, like I said, will remove those sites immediately from search, but it's useful on the one hand to double check that we're doing the right thing, that our algorithms are picking up properly, and that they're really being ignored or at least filtered out the way that they should
I
be.
know I send some crazy stuff sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I can't respond to everything I get by email, but I do pass all of that on to the team.
All right.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left. What else is on your mind?
John, can I jump in with a question on Search Console, please?
Sure.
Well, I've got two actually. So Search Analytics and Search Console, you can filter the queries. At the minute, I can only filter on one query. So say, for example, if you had a brand and you want to filter on brand, you might have different iterations depending on searcher intent, or more about the different ways in which to type in this brand in. But I can't really filter that properly. I can only filter say on one brand, one type of brand name or one word. So is there a way in which you can filter in different queries, or is it just one?
Not in the UI, not at the moment. So what you could do is set something up with the API to download a bigger version of the file and then filter it out in Excel or somewhere else. But in the UI at the moment, you can just filter for like one pattern where you say, well, this is the main word that I'm looking for, and if it has like an S or not, that's something that's still included. But you can't say this brand and this brand and this brand.
Yeah. Okay, great. And that leads me to my second question. Exporting the data. So if I export all the data clicks, it doesn't seem to add up to what the total counter is in the user interface itself. So I'm not sure whether or not it's only exporting a percentage of that data, or what's happening there.
Yeah, that's a common question. Comes up every now and then. It's not the case that our systems can't add up properly. I think that would be too easy of an explanation. What's usually happening there is we're filtering out some queries. We mentioned that in the Help Center as well, where we see when queries just show up individual times or when they appear to be personalized queries, then that's something that we would filter out. The number of queries on top would still include that, but the individual items themselves wouldn't include that. So you can have a situation where you see, like, I don't know, 100 of like clicks or impressions being added up in the table on the bottom, but on top it says maybe 120. So that would just mean that those 20, that difference in impressions, would essentially be queries that are filtered out.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm only seeing a difference of a few thousand, you see, especially with the export, and I think, well,
Yeah.
do I trust the UI or do I trust the data that I've exported?
Yeah. So what's interesting is I think in analytics they actually show that as like unlisted or something like that. If you look at the data in analytics, so it's a little bit, I'd almost say, easier to understand there when you look at the numbers and you add them up, because then you do see this extra item there where it says, well, everything that's kind of filtered out is in this row, and that's so many clicks, so many impressions.
Okay, cool. One question that's just not related to this, sorry. If I've got a site and I want to target different countries, but I've got a blog of content, that's not going to change as such. So how do we approach that? I mean, because I don't want, say, every article to be 10 different versions. How would you approach that, where there are pages that you can't necessarily add the hreflang tags?
You can use hreflang on a per-page basis. So you can say, for this I have different versions, for this I just have one version. That's completely up to you. Obviously, from a technical point of view, it might not be that trivial. If you have like a blog set up for English UK and a blog for English US, and some of the articles are shared and some of them are unique, that might not be trivial, but in general, hreflang does allow for that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
John, I wanted to ask you about mobile usability. I still see, I always bring that up because I still see stuff from 2014 that still has not cleared up, and I know I shouldn't worry about it because it's cleared up already.
So how do you mean?
Huh?
How do you mean not cleared up?
Well, when it takes you to the mobile usability scanner or whatever, when you go in there, then it tells you that the site is mobile friendly. Your mobile tool.
Okay, so the report in Search Console where you
Yeah,
have like
report in Search
the
Console. Yeah,
chart over time.
yeah. So there's 100 errors in this one particular account, and it's been cleared up. I just like seeing it cleared up because I'm thinking ranking, and I'm thinking, and I know I shouldn't think like that, but that's just because
That's good.
I'm a perfectionist, so.
Yeah, that's good to try to clean that up. So
But it's cleaned up. It's just since 2014, the error is still coming up from 2014 and some
that's
stuff from
that's
2015. Are you guys going to
that's
try to? Um,
I don't know. That feels like something we should be handling better. So if it's like that old, we should have recrawled it in the meantime, and we should have updated the status in the meantime. So if it's really like more than a year old, and you're still seeing that in the aggregated reports, then that feels like something we need to fix on our side.
oh, I see. Okay.
So
But it's not just on that. I mean, there's certain on this other account. There was something from 2015 that I still saw. I mean, how often
that's
are you guys going to try to recrawl it a bit faster? Is that should I just not worry about it?
Um, I mean, if there are individual URLs that you see there, you can just use fetch and submit in Search
Oh,
Console
I
to,
see.
to kind of push those through a little bit faster.
Okay.
If it's a big chunk of your website, then that's obviously not that easy. You could theoretically use a sitemap file to let us know about that. But in general, if it's like within the range of a year, I'd say that might be possible that we just haven't recrawled it since then. But if
Okay.
it's older than a year, then that seems like something that either we should recrawl it again to kind of pick up the current status, or we should just drop that URL from index and say, well, if we don't care about this URL enough to actually recrawl it within like 2 years, then maybe we shouldn't keep it indexed like that because I don't know, it doesn't make sense to keep listing it and telling people that it's an error if actually it was an error 2 years ago and we just haven't looked at it since then.
I see. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, more questions. I think we're a bit over time, but if you have time, I have a
Hi,
bit more
John.
time too. Hi.
Yeah, John. Actually, my question was regarding app indexing issue coming in Search Console for one particular page or for one type of pages. I am supporting my desktop website from deep linking. So in Search Console, there is no issue coming for that particular type of pages. But for other type of pages where I am not supporting deep linking from my app to my desktop pages, I am not using alternate tag pointing to my app from desktop and neither supporting from app to desktop. But in Search Console, these errors are coming, and I don't know. I have even been seeing for last 3 months. Still, these errors are still existing, and I don't have any idea about how to remove them or Search Console will update and remove them.
In general, that's not something you'd need to remove manually. So that's kind of saying we crawled some URLs on your app and we didn't find the appropriate version on the desktop page, and that can be perfectly normal. That if you expect those URLs to only be in the app, then that's perfectly fine. So that's not necessarily something you need to kind of remove from the app or block from the app or put in the no index file, for example. That's essentially just an information from our side there.
And Google is using them artificially with artificial intelligence because we have not used any kind of alternate or canonical.
It's I don't know in your specific case. So I don't think we just use artificial intelligence to make these up. Usually, there are two things that I think we've done in the past. I don't know what the current status is. One is where we try to crawl the app page directly, and if there are like ways to go through the app, then we might try to follow that to try to like almost like crawl the app. The other is if you have the app indexing API and you crawl that API even without a related desktop page, then we might be able to pick it up that way as well. But I don't know which variation at the moment is being used. I believe we don't crawl the app at the moment.
When I say submit, so even if you say 3 to 7.
John, can I ask you something?
Sure.
So let's say you have a classified website or maybe a jobs website or something like that, where the pages themselves, the adverts, let's say, only stay alive for like, I don't know, 5, 10, 30 days at the most. And then the adverts expire. What's the best way to deal with that? Should we just, or for the pages, wouldn't that cause a problem since Google would see, oh my God, there's 404 pages coming every day, what's going on with this site? Or should we just keep them and maybe say this advert has expired, here are some other adverts related to this topic or something like that?
That's always a hard question, yeah. So the number of 404s that we see is not a problem. I wouldn't worry about that. It's not that we say this is a low-quality site because the content disappears so quickly. That's perfectly natural in a case like this, in a case in lots of other sites as well. So
what about 404s with, I see a lot of 404s these days from XYZs and like, so-called, I guess spam, reverse spam. I see a lot of those. I mean, do we need to worry about that? I mean, what do we do about this? I mean,
ignore it.
Ignore it. Don't disavow them. Don't disavow them.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a link that goes to a 404, then it doesn't have any impact anyway. Kind of going back to Mihai's question there, one other thing you can do is the unavailable after meta tag might be an option if you have a really hard deadline where you say this is how long this content will be available and I know it will be gone afterwards. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it can be extended, so it's maybe not always the case that it'll work. The other thing that I've seen sites do is to keep the expired content up for a little while and then turn it into 404 so that if someone is searching for something, they'll still be able to go to that page and say, oh, this recently sold for this price, for example, on an auction site, but it's no longer here. Maybe here's some related content, so almost like having a soft 404 page that has more information for the user. But if the content disappears after 30 days and it's a 404 or no index, that's fine with us. That's not something that you need to kind of artificially hide somehow.
I assume redirects are out of the question since you would probably interpret that as a soft 404 anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we would interpret that as a soft 404, so it's kind of like the same as a 404. But if redirects are what you think works best for your users, then fine. We'll see it as a soft 404. That's fine. But if users are happy with those redirects, that's really up to you. Also, on a 404 page, you can serve whatever you want. It's we don't look at the content, but users will still see that content. So you could serve equivalent content. You could serve a list of related items, for example. That's something where you have a lot of flexibility, and I think there's a lot of potential in making really good 404 pages, especially when the website changes very quickly.
John,
all right.
On new forward links, I don't know if it's going to be the last one or not.
Go for it.
So Google attributes anchor text to the first link on the page, so we understand. What if you had links to the same page, no followed either before or after? Does that affect anything? If you have, so you've got, say, a few of the same links to one page, yet some will be no followed, some will be followed. How does Google kind of handle that and anchor text and stuff?
I don't know. So part of this is mostly because these are the type of things that can change over time, where the search quality team wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is a critical change. You need to go tell people about this. Some people do experiments on this and say, oh, well, the first link is like this. And maybe a year or two later, they'll do an experiment and say, oh, but now it's slightly different. It's like this. So this is the type of thing where, from my point of view, it's undefined, kind of like in robots text. If you specify conflicting rules, it's undefined. So it might go one way, it might go the other way. I just recommend not relying on it going in any specific way, but rather making sure that your website just generally works for users, that you use the right anchor text in the right time, that you're not artificially trying to stuff anchors in one place in the hope that they get extra value because the algorithms currently or recently or maybe 5 years ago did one specific thing. So that's...
So what if I had two links going to two different pages? So say the link is to a particular weight of something, but the anchor text is exactly the same. Say, for example, it could be 5 kilos anchor text, but they're going to different pages because it's under different categories, for example.
Sure,
so,
that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, John. Again.
Sure. All right, let's take a break here. I'll try to figure out what's happening with the Q&A, why we can't seem to use that here. Happy I always copy it out. Makes it a little bit easier. I'll set up the next Hangout. I guess they'll be the week after Easter. In the meantime, I wish you all a great Easter if you're taking off, and hope to see some of you again in the next Hangouts. Thanks for dropping by.
Thank you.
Take care, John. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.